Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson. Big week today. Finally got a little bit of off-season news. The Big 12 released its entire football schedule today, so we are going to take a look at that. We'll look at Iowa State's schedule, obviously, but we'll also look at some other schedules of some other teams around the conference, especially some of the contenders at the top. Should be a really interesting thing here. The preface for this, too, is that the Big 12, for the first time, they broadcast it live on a number of channels, on Max, on all basically any Big 12 media entity. So Fox, FS1, Max, a bunch of different things. So this was a concerted effort on the part of the Big 12 to get more conversation happening in the off season about a conference, because we've got plenty of basketball content and stuff like that right now, especially just with Iowa State's basketball team being, struggling a little bit right now, but otherwise being pretty good. This is a time of the year where we typically don't get a lot of football talk outside of some recruiting and things like that. And now that, the early signing day and the early transfer portal exists, right now in the late signing period and all that just kind of gets no traction whatsoever. You're just getting a few late commitments and whatever it is. But other than that, really not a lot going on right now. So the Big 12 decided that they are going to try to capture this kind of moment, this gap in college football media coverage by shifting the focus to the Big 12 schedule right now. And I think they accomplished that because, the Big 12 is still trying to find more places where it can reach out and get to places that college football doesn't ordinarily reach, or the Big 12 doesn't ordinarily reach, without, tiptoeing that very fine line of doing something that seems inauthentic or makes it seem like the Big 12 is an unserious football conference. Because, right now in basketball, the Big 12 as a conference has the best brand in basketball as a conference. Is it, it's been the best conference in the country for a while. This year, you could probably make the argument that the SEC is better. But, as a full brand for the conference, the Big 12 is the best brand in basketball. But in football, they're never going to be able to pass the Big 10 or the SEC. It's just not going to happen. And that's okay, because the Big 12 wants to establish itself as the third best brand. Right behind those two, the Big 12 is right there. And you have to do that. To do that, you got to be able to get people talking about it, make people interested in this, even when you're not in season and there's not anything going on. So that's what part of what this is, and trying to make a big deal out of it. And all the schools did their own little release graphics and videos and things like that to try to be unique with it. But it worked because we're talking about it. Granted, I'd be talking about it anyways because I'm an Iowa State channel. So that's just kind of part of the gig. But I think this is a nice effort on the part of the conference to get people talking about the conference a little bit. So let's go ahead. I'm going to bring up a graphic here. We're going to have this up for a lot of the show, and I apologize for the text being so small, but the Big 12 conference did no help to us whatsoever here to try to make this a little bit easier to read. They went with a very small font, and I do not know why. But essentially, you can look at the key here. The gray is home games, white is away, black's a neutral site. A couple things that you'll notice right off the bat was obviously, Iowa State and Kansas State there in Ireland to open the season, week 0. And then you've got Kansas also has a week 0 game against Fresno State. What this means is that those three teams actually have 3 bye weeks in the season, which is notable. Because if you look at Kansas State and Iowa State both have 4 games, then a bye, 3 games, then a bye. And then Iowa State's got 3 and then a bye and 2. And then Kansas State's got 2 and then a bye and then 3. Kansas State goes 3 bye, 4 bye, 3 bye, 2 bye, or 2 end of the season. Joseph says, "Worry about us dropping in basketball with all the extra money the SEC and Big Ten can throw around, players, coaches, and facilities. They'll be able to fund more of these." I mean, sure. I in basketball, I'm not as worried about it because the roster sizes are so much smaller. And in basketball, getting 1 or 2 players makes a big difference. And right now, the Big 12 has a incredible stable of coaches in the conference. I mean, you've got TJ and Bill Self and Scott Drew and a number of other people. And then you got Jerome Tang at the bottom. And it's honestly, it's a good conference full of coaches, full of great coaches and good players. The Big 12 is going to be there for a long time. It's well established right now. The SEC and Big Ten being able to throw around big money helps them a little bit, but in basketball, it's not such a big deal because, the roster sizes are so much smaller, and it's a lot more dependent on individual players. And an Iowa State or a Kansas or a Baylor or a Texas Tech, they can go out and get an individual or two to be an elite team. So you don't have to be able to go out and get be able to get 10 or 15 guys that cost $1 million a piece like you do in football. You got to go get like a couple guys that are worth a little bit of money and build the rest of your team build the rest of your team right. So basketball is a much more attainable sport to stay competitive in without being a huge spender versus football. So I want to go through a couple of these here. Obviously, I want to start with Iowa. I want to talk about Iowa State. Before we get into that, though, I do want to look at a couple of these other teams. Because I think, when you look at the Big 12 this year, I think there's a group of like 5, maybe 6-ish teams that I think have a really good shot at contending and are like somewhat known quantities going into this. Just going from top to bottom here. The first one's going to be Arizona State. They have a fairly favorable schedule to start with. Well, they got 3 games. They should start 3-0. Depending on this, the Arizona State's a little bit of a question because what does that team look like without Cam Scadaboo? But they've got Sam Levitt. They've got a lot of really good players around there. I expect Arizona State to be good again. So they start 3-0 there. At Baylor is going to be a very tough game because Baylor is another one of these teams that I think is going to be in the mix there towards the top of the conference. TCU is another team that I think will be in the mix. Now this is in Tempe. Is Tempe a super daunting, road environment? I don't know. But that's a tough little 2-game stretch there. At Utah is one of the teams. There's a group of teams in the conference that I have no idea how good they're going to be. No clue. Utah is typically a good program. Kyle Whittingham's a good coach, but this might be his last season. Their quarterback position has no clarity whatsoever to it. They've lost some pieces. The defense should be good. No idea. I think Utah is probably a 6-win team, but honestly, I have no idea. Texas Tech, I expect to be a pretty decent team. They lost some pieces, but I think Texas Tech should be fine. That's probably a team that is on maybe the second tier of like teams that, if they may take a step forward, can compete. But right now they're not in that top tier, I don't think. Houston is another team that, they were towards the bottom of the Big 12, but it wasn't because they were a bad team. They just someone has to be near the bottom. Houston wasn't like great, but they were a difficult, but they were kind of a bad matchup late in the season, especially Willie Fritz kind of got those guys playing pretty well. Iowa State, obviously, we'll talk about it. Obviously, I believe Iowa State is a firm contender for the title next year. West Virginia is another team. No idea what to think about this. Colorado, again, no idea. Arizona is my pick this year to be the worst team in the conference. They lose Ted McMillan. They get no Fafita back, but they lose Ted McMillan. They lose a bunch of other people, and they weren't very good last year, and they lost one of the best receivers in college football. So unless they get an outrageous coaching job this year, I think Arizona might be the worst team in the conference. So if you look at Arizona State, they've got at Baylor, at Iowa State, I think are tough games. At Utah's a tough game, depending on how Utah is. At Colorado could be a tough game, but they get Arizona at home. That should be a dub. West Virginia at home should be a win. Houston, Texas Tech at home, I would think both of those would be a win. TCU, maybe they win two of 3 of TCU, Texas Tech, and Houston. That's a schedule that's got 9-3 or better written. 8-4, 9-3 or better written all over. I think Arizona State's got a decent little schedule there. A lot of their tough games at home outside of Baylor and Iowa State. Well, I should say half of their tough games are at home. Then they've got to go up to Ames in early November. Baylor is another team I think has got to be really good. Auburn is a little bit of a tough game, but they got them at home. I don't think Auburn's all that great, but it'll be a tough game. It's an SEC team. At SMU will probably be tough. I think I would expect SMU to be decent again. So that's a tough game. Samford should be a walk. Arizona State, obviously, that's going to be a really tough one. At Oklahoma State, this is a game where I think Oklahoma State fans are optimistic that they are a bowl team this year. You know, maybe not a 7 or 8 win team, but they feel confident enough they can get to 6-6. If Oklahoma State is serviceable, at Oklahoma State becomes a tough game. K State at home. I mean, K State is K State. They're going to be good, but you got them at home. At TCU is a tough game because I think TCU will be solid. At Cincinnati is a road game, but I don't know that Cincinnati will be anything incredible. UCF is yet another team in the Big 12 that I have no idea what they're going to be because they're losing so many pieces. They're losing RJ Harvey. They already lost Xavier Townsend to Iowa State. They lost, their quarterback situation was murky. Scott Frost is coming in, and Scott Frost is the most recent coach to have like really big time success at UCF, but he's also gone through a lot since then, and a lot in college football has changed since he was at UCF last. So I have no idea what UCF is going to be. Utah at home, it depends on how good you think Utah is going to be, but that should be a winnable game. At Arizona, I think is a game you should win there. But Houston, you got them at home, but I don't think Houston will be a pushover. So Baylor doesn't have Baylor has a little bit of a difficult schedule. They've got a few tough opponents at home: Arizona State, Kansas State, but they do got to go to TCU. They do got to go to SMU. I think it sets up all right, but they're going to have to win a couple tough road games, and they'll have to beat Auburn, stuff like that. They've got a couple tough games there. BYU is another team that I expect to be contending at the top. Portland State, Stanford should be wins. East Carolina should be a win. Colorado is going to be entirely dependent on. Oh, UCF has Alex Grinch as their defensive coordinator. Okay, well, they're going to suck. So Colorado, again, no idea how they're going to be. They've got a 5-star quarterback and they've got the Liberty transfer quarterback, but both of them can't take snaps. So only one of them can play. So, they should have good quarterback play again. They lost JC Horn. They lost Travis Hunter. And that team there was not much to that team outside of those two receivers and Shedeur Sanders last year. They were good. Those three were great. But there wasn't like a lot going on with Colorado besides those three. So we'll see, if Colorado's good again, if Colorado is a bowl team or better this year, I think that kind of validates Deion Sanders as being a good coach. But we'll see. We'll see. They lost, one of the best quarterbacks in college football, maybe the best quarterback in college football, and they lost one of the best college football players of the last 20 years. It's hard to lose that and replace that. West Virginia is another one. Like I said, not sure what they're going to be. I'm not super high on them, but they got them in Provo. I would chalk that up as a win. Arizona is bad. Utah, they got them in Provo for the Holy War. I would think this would be a win. At Iowa State is by far their hardest game. Iowa State's had BYU. Iowa State beat BYU in Provo a couple years ago, but this version of BYU is quite a bit better than the team 2 years ago. That'll be a very tough game. At Texas Tech is going to be another very tough game. Jones AT&T Stadium is a tough road venue. Home versus TCU. I mean, you're in Provo, but TCU I think should be a good team. So that's a tough game there. At Cincinnati is a road game. It's a long, long road trip. From Provo to Cincinnati is a long, long road trip. So that can be tough. Cincinnati, I don't know if they're going to be great, but they'll be, dangerous enough to care about them. And again, UCF, no idea what they're going to be. I think they're going to be bad. They could be bad now that I know that Alex Grinch is their defensive coordinator. BYU's got them at home. So I think this sets up pretty well for BYU. They've got at Iowa State, at Texas Tech. But even if you say they lose both of those, they've got a very doable schedule the rest of the way where I think, they can put 9-3, 10-2 on the board. Fairly, there's a very clear path forward to a 9-3, 10-2 type of season. Again, UCF, no idea. Cincinnati, no, I don't think they're going to be great, but maybe they step up. Colorado, no clue. Houston probably still behind, but they've got kind of a tricky schedule, and we'll see what Willie Fritz has got those guys doing. But they weren't a doormat last year. They were a team to contend with, but it's a little bit tricky. I'm going to come back to Iowa State because I'm going to do them at the end. Kansas is an interesting one. They were bad, really bad to start last year, and they were unbelievable. They were the hottest team in college football the last like 6 weeks of the season. Um, and damn near scraped together a bowl game out of that somehow. Um, Jalen Daniels is back, but they lose so much. They lose Luke Grimm, they lose Devin Neal, they lose the tight end whose name is escaping me. They lose Kobe Bryant. They lose a lot of experience off that team that aren't coming back. You know, they've got the week 0 Fresno State, Wagner, Missouri. Fresno State, Wagner, they should win those two. At Missouri is going to be a tough one. Missouri they weren't bad last year, but they certainly were not the world beaters that some people apparently thought that, like the AP thought they were going to be. Jared Casey, that is, yes, thank you. Jared Casey is the tight end I was thinking of. But that'll be a tough game. That's certainly a game that they could lose. West Virginia at home. Again, I'm not 100% sure what West Virginia is going to look like, but they get them at home. Kansas will be in their new stadium, by the way. So theoretically, they have a little bit better home advantage than they used to. Cincinnati at home should win that. At UCF is going to depend entirely on what UCF looks like, but I would assume that Alex Grinch would have a pretty bad time trying to defend Kansas in this game. At Texas Tech is going to be tough, very tough. Kansas State at home is tough. Oklahoma State at home is potentially tough, but we'll have to see what Oklahoma State looks like. Arizona is going to be bad. Then you come up to Iowa State, which I would say that like right now that's the toughest game on their schedule, but they also beat our ass last year because schematically Kansas causes so many issues for Iowa State. I mean, I would guess Iowa State, if both teams are kind of doing what I think they're going to do, Iowa State's probably favored in that game. But boy, am I not going to feel confident about picking that unless something's completely different from what I thought. Then Utah at home, winnable game there. Kansas I think has a fairly doable schedule. They got that tough non-con at Missouri. Let's say if you say they lose the coin flip or worse, you say they lose that, they lose 1, 2, maybe 3, 4. I would say 8-4 is a pretty good. I think that's a pretty good number for Kansas, assuming they otherwise take care of business. Against the teams they should. I think the schedule sets up all right for them. Kansas State, obviously starting with us in Ireland, I think Iowa State will be favored going into that game. This stretch to start the season is kind of brutal for Kansas State. They've got us, and then they've got North Dakota, which, yes, we played them last year and we won 24-0. But if you guys paid attention, if you watch the game a little bit and then pay attention to what happened with North Dakota the rest of the season, North Dakota was sneaky good. That offense was very good, and they were running with a true freshman at quarterback. This is not a game. North Dakota is not going to strike fear in your heart. If that said state after that, it said North Dakota State, everybody is immediately panicking. But North Dakota isn't going to set off the same alarm bells that North Dakota State does. But North Dakota is not an FCS team to be trifled with. That's a team that can put points on the board. And then they got to play Army at home, which, boy, early in the season, getting Army early in the season, that sucks. that really sucks. Your defense is probably not up to full speed just yet, and you got to play against the triple option. That is terrible. I would not want any part of this game. I think Kansas State would be favored. I would think they'd be favored in that game, but God, I don't want any part of that. At Arizona, I think Arizona's going to be terrible. UCF, don't know what they're going to be. Probably going to be bad. That should be a win. At Baylor is going to be a very tough game on the road there. TCU at home, I think TCU will be good. They got them at home, but TCU should be solid. At Kansas is definitely a game that they could lose. Texas Tech is at home, but again, tough game. At Oklahoma State, if Oklahoma State is a fringe bowl team at this point, this is a game that scares the bejeebus out of me if I'm a Kansas State fan. At Utah, don't love that if Utah is competent. And then you got home versus Colorado. That stretched open the season sucks. But if they can make it through the first half of the season, they can make it through the first 9 games and only have 1 or 2 losses. I think they're in the title hunt. But, Texas Tech, Kansas, at Baylor, at Kansas, at Baylor. This stretch right here, this 4-game stretch, God, man, a lot of this schedule sucks, right? This 3-game stretch sucks. this 3-game stretch, this 4-game stretch, this 4-game stretch sucks. And then you don't love these two right here. I mean, if Avery Johnson takes a huge step forward, maybe they can get through that. But boy, I'm thinking at least 3 losses here. But it just depends. Because they lost, they lose Jared Giddens. Avery Johnson has to take a step forward as a quarterback and making good decisions because he just still makes some incredibly stupid decisions right now. He's not like an incredibly accurate passer. So we'll see. Kansas State will be good, but whether they're a 10-2 team or an 8-4 team will depend on how they handle Army, and it'll depend on how they handle, us and how they handle Baylor and things like that. Oklahoma State is an interesting one. UT Martin at home, win that. At Oregon, that sucks. Probably not going to win that one. But then you get Tulsa at home, can win that. Baylor at home is maybe Baylor's a 3-point favorite, but it's certainly a winnable game. At Arizona, you should win that. Houston, I think you should win that at home. Cincinnati, you should win that at home. Texas Tech's going to be on the road's tough. Kansas on the road's tough. K-State, if like I said, if Oklahoma State is competent at this point, getting K-State at home this late in the season is not the worst thing. That's potentially one to steal in there. At UCF could be a weird one, but I think they should win that. And then you get Iowa State at home, which getting us at home is good, but I think if Iowa State's the team I think they're going to be, that's a tough one. TCU is another one of my contenders here. At UNC. This will be fascinating because you get Bill Belichick's first game. So that's kind of weird. I have no idea what to think about this. I have no idea how good UNC is going to be. I have no idea. I would think TCU will be favored in this, but I couldn't tell you. Abilene Christian's a win. SMU, I think, will be good, but that's at home. I think you beat SMU there. At Arizona State's probably an L. Do not like that game for TCU at all. Colorado home, you think you can probably win that. Depends on how good Colorado is. At K-State, do not like that. Baylor at home is going to be tough, but winnable. At West Virginia, it seems like that could be a trap game because by then maybe Rich Rod's got West Virginia up and going, and Morgantown's a tough place to play. That could be a little bit of a trap game. Iowa State at home, you go at home. Iowa State does not typically play well in Fort Worth, but I think Iowa State will be a favorite there. At BYU, probably not winning that one. That's tough. I mean, you could, but the uphill battle there for sure. At Houston, by this point in the season, Houston might be a team that you don't really want to play. So this could be a trap game here. Cincinnati at home, I think you win that. So, the floor is like a 6-6, 7-5, a very mediocre season. But if TCU is better than we think they are and steals a couple of these, maybe steals this at K-State game or steals the West Virginia game or steals the Houston game, I think that could be a nice season for them. Texas Tech got three two cupcakes here. Oregon State, I think, was okay last year. No idea what they've got going on this year. At Utah, an early road trip. Depends on how good you think Utah is going to be. At Houston could be a little bit of a trap game. Kansas at home. Arizona State's not great. Oklahoma State at home. You definitely want that game at home. At Kansas State's a tough one. BYU at home. Still going to be a tough one, but you get them at home. UCF at West Virginia. This could be a trap game here, but you think they can get that one, this one, this one. It's a kind of a tough schedule. So if you just counting wins, you got 1, 2, 3 there. Say you start 4-0. Houston, they could be, they could be 5, 6-0. They could start the game. They could easily start the season 6-0. They could easily start 3-3. Yeah, and that's a very late bye for Texas Tech. Having a bye before the last game of the season is tough. You could start 3-3 there. If you lose, you could win those 3 and lose these 3 pretty easily. 6-0 and 3-3 is there, but then after that you got Arizona State. You probably don't like your chances there, unless Arizona State takes a significant step back, which I don't think they will. And then you got 3 tough games here, potentially 2 back-to-back here you don't really like. So even if you say you start 6-0, you're 6-1, maybe 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, 8-3, 8-4, maybe. 8-4, 9-3 is on the table. Utah and West Virginia, I'm not going to go into them too depth. I think they've got a long ways to go to be real contenders, unless like I said, unless Rich Rod recaptures some magic here. I don't love this. This both of these teams having a bye, one bye right before the end of the season is just horrible. But I want to talk now about Iowa State because I am in love with the schedule. This schedule is fantastic for Iowa State. So you get K-State and Ireland. I think, like I said, I think Iowa State will be a favorite going into this game. Should win that. South Dakota is a competent FCS program, but I would think Iowa State should be a 21-point, a 3-touchdown favorite, and hopefully you win by that at least. Iowa is at home. This is the one. I'll be dead in my grave before I pick Iowa to win this game. But history is on the side of Iowa. The road team typically wins this game. Iowa's offense is more competent, but I think their defense will take a step back. I think this is a game Iowa State should win. And then at Arkansas State, it's kind of a weird road trip. Butch Jones is a good coach. They should take care of business here, but this is definitely not one you can sleep on. But let's say you start at 4-0 there. Arizona, I think, is going to be terrible. You get them at home. You should be 5-0 there. At Cincinnati, they won at Cincinnati 2 years ago. I don't think the program is like demonstrably better than I don't think Cincinnati's program is demonstrably better than it was 2 years ago. So I think this should be a win here. At Colorado is probably the first one you're really looking at. Outside of Iowa State, Iowa and Kansas State. Outside of Iowa and Kansas State, Colorado is probably the first one you're looking at. And like, this is where they could trip up. It depends on how good you think Colorado is going to be. But, I think Iowa State will be favored in this. But you're playing at elevation, stuff like that. Which they played at BYU. BYU is at a similar-ish elevation to Colorado. But, it's a little bit of a tough environment. So, that's maybe one you're looking at. They could step up. They could stumble. And then you've got BYU and Arizona State back-to-back at home. 2 tough games, but boy, getting your 2 best opponents at home is great. Love that. BYU coming into Jack Trice, I think that'll be a fun game. Then you get Arizona having to come up to Jack Trice on November 1st. It's probably going to be a little chilly, probably in the 30s or 40s. I guess probably in the low 40s, I would guess. That's going to be a good game. That's going to be I'd be shocked if they don't put this game at night and they don't wear the black uniforms. This has black uniforms at night written all over it. Then you go to TCU. Don't love that because you think TCU is probably going to be solid. Iowa State does not typically play very well in Fort Worth. So, maybe you're definitely not like hardlining it in as an L, but this is a tough one. Unless Iowa State is like undefeated at this point, this is probably a game that you're not feeling great about. And then you get a bye week and then you get Kansas at home, which again, Iowa State should be favored in this and should win it. But everybody else is everybody that watched the game last year and the year before that knows that Kansas's offense is a horrific matchup for Iowa State. Horrible. That doesn't mean that Iowa State can't win. But this is a game. This is no different than playing UNI or North Dakota State, where you're like, God, we should win this, but am I going to be miserable the whole week thinking about it? This is going to suck. This is a game that you could lose this at home, and I hate that very much. But then you go to Oklahoma State to finish the season, which if Oklahoma State's competent, that's a tough game. But Iowa State has won in Stillwater before. It's not unprecedented at all. However, the reason I love this schedule, beyond just getting BYU and Arizona State at home, getting some friendly road games, getting Iowa at home, getting K-State in a neutral instead of in Manhattan. The reason I love this is because of Iowa State's buys. The biggest complaint that you always get from players about early season buys is that, especially if they're like right after the Iowa game, or if it's right after the non-con and you play 3 games, Iowa State's going to have 4 games before they hit to a bye week, which gives you plenty of time to get into a rhythm. You can you can start to develop some rhythm both on offense and defense, and then you can go into the bye and you can sit down, you can get a little bit healthy if you need to. You can really hunker down for conference play. Now you've got 4 games worth of game tape there. And then you come back and you get Arizona, which I think Arizona will be terrible. So not only do you get that bye after you've already gotten on a little bit of rhythm, you're coming back against a team that you should probably beat by a couple touchdowns, I think. So you kind of get a warm up coming into it, and so you get a slow ramp up into conference play. So you get Arizona, which again I think they're going to be bad. You can kind of shake off the bye week rust and get back into a rhythm there. Cincinnati, again, I don't think they're going to be amazing. I think they'll be fine. Like you take them seriously, but I don't think they're going to be amazing. You get there at Colorado is the toughest part of that stretch. Hopefully they're back. There should be back up to full speed and everything, ready to go to Colorado. Get a nice bye week there, so that way you can be fresh and ready to go for your return trip home. Get a little bit healthy, get a little bit more practice in for some other guys, some depth pieces, and then you get BYU and Arizona State. BYU is the team that you probably feel better about than Arizona State just based on last year. But you feel like you match up better with BYU. So you get the better matchup coming off the bye, and you can get back into your rhythm. And then hopefully if you can win that, you're coming into Arizona State probably with a pretty good record and a pretty nice little number next to your name. And this is right around when the first playoff rankings come out. So you might have a nice little number next to your name in the first playoff rankings. And you got Arizona State, big night game at home, black uniforms, going to be great. And then, maybe you can win both of those. If you take both of those games, you are feeling awesome, really good. You're feeling really exceptional about your chances to get to Dallas or to get to Arlington to try to get that Big 12 title. Then you go down to TCU. So you've got momentum there. You do have to go down to TCU. That's tough, but TCU is coming off a bye, which you can see that can go one way or the other, as all bye weeks can. Is either they get extra rest and they get an extra week to prep, or they're rusty. If you look at TCU's schedule, so TCU's got the bye right before us, but after that, they've come off a very long stretch of games. So they may be pretty well ground down by the time they get to this, and maybe the bye week doesn't save them. TCU's schedule is brutal, by the way. At UNC, bye right after the first game. And then they have to rattle off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row. And then you get a bye, and then 4 in a row to finish the season. That 4 in a row to finish the season wouldn't be such a problem if the bye week was like here instead of here. So TCU is going to go through a tough grind right here, where they're playing for basically 2 months straight. And, so that's a game Iowa State should have a shot at. You survive that tough 3-game stretch. You come back home, you get a bye week to prepare for Kansas, a terrible schematic matchup for you. And come back home, you get Kansas after that week off to get a little bit healthy and to prep schematically for Kansas. You get Kansas at home, take care of business, go down to Oklahoma State, finish it off, and try to play for a Big 12 title. As far as this goes, I don't know if you could have set this up a lot better. Maybe if you're asking me to make one switch, I think maybe you switch the TCU and Colorado game so you can have a nice steady ramp up there, and then you can have BYU, Arizona State, and then have a because I think TCU would be better than Colorado. So maybe you even this little 3-game stretch out a little bit, but other than that, I'm not sure that given Iowa State's opponents and where you got to play the games, I'm not sure that this schedule could be any better for Iowa State. I really, really love where all these games are and where you're playing them and where, especially where the bye weeks are. Gosh, this feels really good. So if you're looking at this, I think Iowa State will be favored against Kansas State. We're in Ireland. We're having a good time. Let's beat Kansas State in Ireland. South Dakota, again, competent, but you should beat them by a couple touchdowns. That's 2-0. Iowa, tough game. Road team usually wins. Fuck them. 3-0. Arkansas State, 4-0. Arizona State, 5-0. Cincinnati, tough, but definitely can win. I mean, like you should be favored by a touchdown at least in that. If you're 5-0 at this point, you are favored by at least a touchdown. 6-0 at Colorado. If you're 6-0 right now and Colorado is 4-2, let's see, what does Colorado's schedule look like? So they've got Georgia Tech, which maybe is a trap game. Delaware is bad. Houston's a little bit of a tough one, especially early in the season. They got Wyoming, and then they got BYU. So Colorado and at TCU. Colorado's probably 4-2 at best, maybe 3-3 or worse. Maybe 3-3 or worse, but probably 4-2 or probably 4-2. I would say. Um, you could eat. I mean, there's a very realistic path here to being 7-0 there. Being 7-0 heading into BYU Arizona State. And then you got BYU and Arizona State at home. BYU, let's see, they are coming. So they're at the end of a 6-game stretch. So they would have just played the Holy War the week before. So that is a big emotional letdown from there. You have to sit there and be on adrenaline all week for that Holy War and then come down. If they lose that game, this is terrible. But even if they win that game, going on the road to Iowa State after the Holy War sucks for BYU. That's a tough spot for BYU. I think you're favored in that. I think you win that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Arizona State's tough. You look at it, it's hard to shake off the memory of last season. This little stretch that they're coming off here is 3 easier, 3 of their easier. But maybe Texas Tech is a tough one. Maybe Texas Tech is good enough to steal one in Tempe. But this is a 3-game stretch where it should be manageable for Arizona State. They should be on a little bit of a roll coming in here. They're probably at least, maybe they lose one of TCU or Baylor, but otherwise they're, 4. Let's say they're 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, 7-1. This could be a 7-1 Arizona State versus an 8-0 Iowa State, which I think would be a probably close to a top 10 matchup, if not a top 10 matchup, very close to it. That would be I don't know what the SEC schedule looks like. This is kind of prime part of the SEC and Big Ten schedule where you're going to run into other big games. But if it's a top 10 matchup, you're talking about maybe having game day or something like that. But you're still at home, night game, black uniforms, probably. This is still a game Iowa State can win. It's revenge for the Big 12 title game. Maybe this is a chance where you can really, if you go to 9-0 in Arizona State, if you go to what would it be 7-0 in conference, 8 or 6-0 in conference, and knock Arizona State back to 4-2, you're feeling really good about your stretch down the end of the season. But for fun, let's say they lose that one. You go on the road to TCU. If you lose at Arizona State, you probably don't feel as good about the TCU game, but you're still probably favored. TCU is coming off that long, long stretch. I think you can win that game. I think you win that game. So at this point, you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9-1. Kansas at home. I think you got the bye week there. I think you can shake off the ghosts here. 10-1. At Oklahoma State's a little tough. Maybe you drop that 10-2. My 10-2 is predicated on losing one of 2 home games that you are probably going to be favored in, probably in both, and losing this road game that you're probably going to be favored in. If Iowa State's season shakes out how I think it's gonna, there's a pretty decent chance they'll be favored in every game. Meaning that there is a realistic path to 12-0. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the odds are. That's true. Iowa State has never won 10 games. Iowa State has never won 10 games in a season. Absolute poverty. So there's a realistic path here to 12-0 because of the way the schedule shakes out. It's not going to happen. Well, I don't think it's going to happen. The odds are very much against 12-0. But let's say you even lose Iowa, you lose Kansas State, and you lose one of these. That's still 9-3. And that's still 9-3. And you are, you only have one loss in conference, which is going to put you in Arlington. Gosh, even if you lose Kansas State, I guess Kansas State's a Kansas. So you'd have two losses, but you'd still be probably on a tiebreaker to get into Arlington. If you beat Kansas State and Iowa, the quest for 11-1 or better is fully on because the rest of this schedule feels great. I mean, like I hate to be that guy that's like, oh, we're going undefeated or whatever. But like I'm looking at the schedule. I'm looking at there's a clear divider between the teams at the top. Like I think Iowa State, BYU. I think Iowa State and BYU are probably I think they are tier 1A, and I think you got Baylor, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and TCU in tier 1B or maybe tier 1.75, whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a difference between like those 5 or 6 teams and the rest of the conference that has major question marks. But gosh, I I really like how this schedule sets up. Um, before I keep vamping too much farther, if anybody's got any questions for me for the schedule for Iowa State football, I guess even Iowa State basketball, or even just about me and my various things, definitely help. Definitely more than happy to answer any of those, and love good Q&A session. So kind of really an AMA, I guess, if anything, and ask me anything session. So definitely feel free to throw those in the chat. I've been trying to respond to as many as I can. But this is an interesting schedule. I think the contenders at the top have doable schedules. Like I said, I think BYU's got a path probably to 10-2 or better. Texas Tech's got a nice schedule that I think they can hit 9-3. And it may be better if they steal one on the road. They steal like at Kansas State, maybe. But then you look at like Arizona State has got a little bit of a tough schedule. TCU's schedule did not do them any favors whatsoever. I think they're a good team. I think they can win some of these games. And I think they can be an 8-win team. But some of these games are just really tough. The schedule just is really horrible for them. Where the place on the bye weeks. Baylor's got some wins in there, but they've got some really tough games. This seems like a team that's probably going to be like 3 losses coming into the thing. Maybe drop K-State, Arizona State, and TCU. Maybe you might drop 3 or 4 there if you're Baylor, but you're probably still there, on the edge, waiting for a tiebreaker or something like that. But I tell you what, just based on the schedule, BYU and Iowa State clearly, to me, have the clearest paths to Arlington. And I think Iowa State's path to Arlington is quite a bit better than BYU's, frankly. This schedule, this little stretch here is, they've got manageable through these first 4. Holy War is kind of an up in the air thing, but I think they should win that. And then you got to go out after that. You got to go to Iowa State after that emotional roller coaster of that whole week. Maybe you lose this. I think hopefully Iowa State wins this game, and then so you've lost there, and now you got to go sit on all that. You got to somehow recover yourself emotionally from all that right here, and then go down to Lubbock, which is terrible, and then play Cincinnati at home. Now there are a few chaos machines in the conference that could make for this, make for some wonky stuff. Colorado is a chaos machine here. No idea how good they're going to be. They were good ish last year, but they also had some exceptionally good individual players. And I think UCF, I was on board with them being a chaos machine before, but now that I know that Alex Grinch is their defensive coordinator, I'm kind of out on them as the chaos machine. Houston absolutely is chaos machine territory. I don't think they're going to be good enough yet to like really push at the top of the conference. But this is a team that I wouldn't want to have to play on the road or anything. Glad Iowa State got that road trip out of the way. And Kansas is definitely a chaos machine for sure. I mean, honestly, maybe they're not even a chaos machine. I think they might just be, that second tier contender there. It just kind of depends on if Jalen Daniels is any good. If he's consistent, if he stays healthy, if they can find playmakers around. Oklahoma State could be a little bit of a chaos machine, and so could West Virginia. And frankly, a good chunk of this conference is chaos machine. I think Arizona is the only, like Arizona and Cincinnati are the only like teams that I feel pretty confident will finish near or at the bottom. But Yeah, Brian made a great point here. Like, I'm totally cool with missing Tech, UCF, and Utah and Baylor, especially like missing Tech and Baylor. Really good with that. If we had to play Utah at home, I think I'd be fine. And if I wouldn't love playing at UCF, just given what happened last year, but their roster is totally different coaching staff. I think UCF's going to struggle. Um, but definitely cool missing Tech and Baylor. Do not need to play them. Um, yeah, this is an interesting schedule. I'm when I saw the layout for the opponents for Iowa State, I was already fairly like pretty high. I was like, okay, well, we got BYU and Arizona State home. We've got some easy-ish road games, easier road games. I should say. This, the main trip up points though I see, obviously K-State and Iowa are both games that like you could lose those games for sure. But in conference, in the main chunk of conference play, I should say, the easy trip up games are BYU, Arizona State, at TCU. These three, I mean, you could lose all three of those. It's definitely not out of the realm of possibility that you could lose all three of those. But I mean, if you look at like the floor, the absolute dead nuts floor of this team, if like Xavier Townsend and Chase Sowell don't work out, the offensive line is bad, the secondary just hasn't stepped up, shit goes wrong, you're still looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6, maybe 7 wins there, even if everything goes to complete shit. Like, there's no way you're not making a bowl game with this schedule. You'd be pretty disappointed. You'd be pretty disappointed. Oh my God. Hold on a second. I don't know if I'm back or not, but oh my God. Okay. You'd be pretty disappointed if you ended up at 6 or 7 wins. But the path is there for Iowa State to get to I'm almost there. The path is to get to 11 wins, 10, 11, 12 wins for Iowa State is right there. Take care of your bye weeks. Take care of Kansas. Oh my God, I do need to get some water. Give me 1 second. I'm going to get some water real quick. Okay, we're back. I've recovered. Okay, so take care of your 2 tough games at home. Take care of BYU and Arizona State at home. Take care of your 2 tough road games, which is at TCU, at Colorado. And just get Kansas, get a win, get Kansas the fuck out of Ames. And you're right there. You're going back to Arlington to play, hopefully not some generational running back like Cam Scadaboo, and win a Big 12 title for the first time since 1912. I think, as you say, Kansas State eliminated from Arlington during their last bye. Let's see. So, because Kansas State could have, I see, let's say they lose to us, got 1, 2. Let's say they take care of business otherwise. Let's say they've got 2 losses there. Actually, they may have 3 because they had to play at Kansas. So let's say 1, 2, 3. They've got 3 losses there. They're still in it, but they need some help. Iowa State wins at TCU that weekend, and Baylor and BYU wins at Texas Tech that weekend. Kansas State gets eliminated. I'm in on that. I am in on that theory. So, if you guys got any other questions, I'm more than happy to take them. But I think we're going to about wrap her up for this week. I apologize for me completely losing my voice there for a second. But I appreciate everybody for watching. For all my Iowa State fans for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate everybody. And I also especially appreciate all the fans tuning in that are not Iowa State fans and checking this out a little bit. I think I hopefully did a good enough analysis here for every other team too. I kind of dismissed Cincinnati and in some of these other teams a little bit, but trying to stick with some of the what I believe to be the contenders. But as we saw last year in the Big 12, there's probably going to be one or two teams that are just not nearly as good as we think they're going to be, and there's a couple teams that are probably going to be a lot better than we thought they were going to be. Like, it wouldn't shock me if we saw that, like, maybe Rich Rod's got some magic at West Virginia, or maybe Dion really is a really nice coach, and in that those quarterbacks in Boulder are the business. Maybe Colorado's good again. Maybe Willie Fritz has Houston in a really good spot, and maybe they can win eight games or something like that and cause some chaos. So it's going to be a really interesting season. But my overall synopsis here, though, is that I really like Iowa State's schedule. I think it's fantastic. I think it sets up perfectly. Matt Campbell's going to eat these little mini seasons up because, like, we talked about last year how or it was a year or two ago, how he broke. I think it was last year how they broke it up into like four game seasons essentially. He can do the same thing here: 4-game season, 3-game season, 3-game season, 2-game season. Well, and potentially a 3-game season, a third game there if you're in the Big 12 title game. So, I appreciate it. Thank you, General. So, hopefully I did a good enough job here. So I think we're going to probably wrap her up for this week. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Be back again next week. I'm not 100% sure what we're going to do. We might go through the recruiting class. Just see if there's a couple recruits that we've gotten recently. Yeah. So we've gotten some new recruits for 2026 already. Especially when one that recruited that committed right on his junior day, last weekend. So talk about those a little bit probably. And we'll see. I've got a couple other ideas for stuff we can go over too. But I think in a couple weeks, I think maybe in 2 weeks, I'll do the first of my ideas where we go back into either a player's career or a specific game or a season, kind of a historical analysis. I think in 2 weeks is probably going to be my first episode doing something like that where we dive into some historical stuff too. So hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I was off to the side. You couldn't see my pretty face the whole time, but everybody, thank you for watching. And we will see you again next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time, right here on YouTube and on Twitter on the Voice of College Football Network. I am Levi Stevenson. See you all again next week.